Hey, it's Jordan. Delighted to be joined by Seattle City Council member Kshama Sawant, a proud socialist who, other than Bernie Sanders, I really can't think of anyone who has drawn the ire of what I call the United Corporations of America. So after an impressive victory to be reelected last year, now it seems to me right-wing efforts have taken the forefront to recall you, citing ethical breaches and all these dastardly things, such as protesting with activists against the oppressive Seattle mayor and other things. So can you inform people how did this recall start and who do you believe is behind it?
Absolutely. First of all, just the charges that you mentioned, Jordan, there are 4 charges. And I say charges as in these are not based in fact, but these are claims that have been made by the petitioners for the recall campaign. And the charges are precisely what you said, which is basically accusing my office for doing exactly what I promised to do every time I ran for election and what I have fulfilled in my promises, which is stand up unabashedly and unapologetically for working people and marginalized communities and our oppressed people, including the vast numbers of workers who right now are being financially and health-wise devastated from the COVID pandemic and also from the economic recession. And so when you look at the substance of these charges, what lies behind the surface is what matters, which is that big business, the right wing, and the Democratic Party establishment, the political establishment, they are absolutely infuriated by the impact that my office and the movements that we have helped build has had. But this is especially happening in the context of, one, of course, this pandemic, but this pandemic has also helped, just in a very sharp way, unravel what was already in process, which is a deep and long-term crisis in the global system of capitalism. The system is completely defunct. It has no solution for the climate catastrophe, for poverty and inequality, and especially for the tens of millions of young people in our country and and many more around the world. There is there's nothing on offer other than a dead-end economy. So it's in this context that the Black Lives Matter protest became the biggest ever street protest in U.S. history, bringing out over 26 million multiracial united movement in the United States. And so it's no coincidence that 3 of the 4 charges that big business and the right wing and the establishment have leveled at me in this so-called recall are related to the Black Lives Matter movement, and they are very much stemming from my 100% support of the Black Lives Matter movement. So in reality, this is not an attack on just me. This is an attack on socialists everywhere. This is an attack on the left throughout America. It is an attack on the tens of millions of young people who courageously went out on the streets against police violence, who are fed up with racism and oppression and with inequality and are looking for something better. And I think that is why it's important that we are talking about this, because everybody who has a stake in building a different kind of society should take this seriously and help us to defeat it.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but one of the charges, I just couldn't believe this, that you, I don't know, let protesters in Seattle City Hall or something like that at night, as if like it's a castle that needs to have a moat around it and the people that pay their salaries cannot go inside or peacefully protest. I don't even know what would be the objection to that. What laws or principles are violated, or is the principle that working people in Seattle can't protest at City Hall?
I think, Jordan, you hit the nail on the head by describing it as if, is it a castle with a moat around it? This is City Hall. By definition, this should belong to the people. The representatives who have been elected by voters need to be accountable to the vast majority of the constituents who have put them in office. So from any standpoint of democracy, any concept that any reasonable person might have about democracy, this should be a non-issue. And let me just clarify before there are any questions about this. We have not broken any laws whatsoever. The point is, this is not about the law, and this is not about democracy. What I'm trying to say is that when the ruling class under capitalism, when the political establishment comes under threat from a rising movement that is increasingly refusing to accept the authority of these bourgeois parties, that is increasingly finding these political establishment leaders to be not legitimate because they have not offered anything different, anything better for ordinary people. In the context of rising movements, then you will see the political establishment throwing all their stated commitments to laws and democracy out the window. In other words, City Hall is supposed to be for the people. Well, they will make a scandal out of the fact that the socialist elected representative invited ordinary people, as you said, taxpayers, people of our city, to City Hall. And I'll just tell you one thing, in relation to what you just said. When we went there, we were just there for an hour. We did a general assembly. It was really empowering. Hundreds of people came and told me and my staff this was empowering for them to come to City Hall. But I just wanted to recount one small incident because it was so moving for me and it captured the essence of everything you just said, which is a young Black activist leader, a woman who's also a member of the labor movement, who's been a courageous leader on the front lines of the protests in Seattle, who came, she walked along with me inside City Hall. And the moment she walked in and she saw 1,000 people there chanting for Black Lives Matter, she broke into tears and she said, I have never been to City Hall. I never felt like I could come here. And I have never thought that I could have an elected representative who would make us feel like we belong, like we could have a power, and that our power comes from being organized in these large numbers. So I think that is precisely what threatens and scares big business and the political establishment, and they should be scared, because if we get organized, if we fight back, there is nothing to stop us. And this is not idle speculation. Just recently in the summer, we saw how, as a product of the Black Lives Matter movement in Seattle, we were able to lead and win the historic Amazon tax, which has now meant a $2 billion transfer over 10 years from big business to working people to fund affordable housing and the Green New Deal. It is all this social progress that big business wants a do-over on.
And let's talk about big business. I'm reading an article, this is from September, so I'm sure it's similar now, but they claim, the Recall Sawant campaign claims that they got donations from 1,700 people. Well, 94% of those donors were anonymous. So who the hell knows who's donating to this? They also asked for donations no more than $25 because I guess there's some provision that if it's $25 or less, you don't have to disclose who you are. So it could be Amazon, it could be Boeing, it could be Democratic establishment, could be a whole lot of people that kind of makes it look populist when we really don't know what it is.
I think that's very true. In fact, it's a very conscious approach that they're using where, as you said, they're keeping many of their donations 25 or lower because that allows them legally to have anonymous donations. And look, let's be clear. There is unfortunately a growing right-wing tendency in most cities around the nation. And a lot of that has to do with how emboldened right-wing ideology has become since the Trump election in 2016. And in fact, even though Trump has been defeated, we know Trumpism and right-wing ideas are not going to be dead automatically. It's, because they themselves in the first place have been a product of the fact that neither of the two political parties represents ordinary people. And that is why actually it's very urgent to build the left. So I think it's true that there are people who are not, your traditional big business or even millionaires who subscribe to right-wing ideas and are probably going to be opposed to my office and are probably going to support the recall campaign. But we should not kid ourselves that just because there are these anonymous donations, this is not being driven by big business. We should have full confidence in our basic analysis, first of all, about how this world works under capitalism, and also look at the facts. We know Martin Selig, who is a really noxious Trump-supporting billionaire. He actually, one of his distinguishing characteristics is that he's a corporate landlord in Seattle, among the many other corporate interests he has. And one of the buildings he owns in Seattle is the building in which ICE is located on Seattle downtown. And in fact, I personally have been out there doing civil disobedience against Trump's odious policies against the immigrant community. And so Martin Seelig is a prominent Trump-supporting billionaire who has donated to this campaign. In fact, his daughter, Jordan Seelig, has been quoted in a local newspaper as offering all her help to the recall campaign. And we recently heard one of the new donors to this campaign is the CFO of Airbnb, which is another notorious corporation. So we should expect that if this recall is actually approved by the state Supreme Court, which I wouldn't be surprised if they are, because overwhelmingly the courts are not on the side of the left, let alone socialists. But when this actually goes into ballot, if the state Supreme Court approves the recall, we will absolutely see not only a flood of major donations officially to the campaign from big business and the billionaire and millionaire class, but we will see independent expenditures. We will see we will see a part two of what we saw last year. Last year, as you mentioned, we fought our second re-election and third election campaign to city council. And despite all the massive opposition from big business led by Amazon and the Chamber of Commerce, despite even all the progressive Democrats on the city council, Latinas who call themselves labor representatives running candidates against my office, despite all of that effort, despite $1 million being spent against us, we were able to win. But we're going to see part two of all that corporate cash. And that is why I would urge everybody to join our struggle, because it is important we send a message to big business that when you attack our interests, when you attack working people, we will get organized and fight back.
And I think what's important here is there's a psychology involved. On one end, big business is scared. You successfully got the Amazon tax after successfully raising minimum wage to $15 in Seattle years ago. Also, at least temporarily, a prohibition on tear gas. I don't know if they're actually following that. So they're seeing this slippery slope of progressive accomplishments, and they're getting deathly afraid of opening up a Pandora's box that they can't close again. And then on the other end, I think, listen, Amazon poured in over $1 million to try and defeat you last time. That's a lot for a city council race. Do you think there's an element here where now with the recall, they're just trying to tire out progressives and socialists to the point where, I mean, if you have to continually fighting Amazon just to reelect you, fighting tooth and nail for these victories, and now fighting to keep you in office, it seems to me their strategy is to just exhaust people.
Absolutely. I think that is very much part of the strategy. On the one hand, they have a combination of arrogance and hubris of the system that they dominate. But on the other hand, they're also fearful, not of me as an individual, but of what my office has been able to accomplish, because we have shown a fundamentally different approach. I mean, let me just say, a lot of even the so-called progressive Democrats who opposed us last year, their approach throughout since my election has been to either try to corrupt or intimidate my office through psychological warfare, saying I was not nice, I did not work well with others. They're throwing all this so-called respectability politics at me. None of that worked. We were able to win $15 an hour. The first year I was elected, in fact, 6 months after I took office, we have won landmark renters' rights. This year, we won a law that has not been passed anywhere outside of France, to my knowledge, which is a winter evictions ban in our city to protect renters in especially the harshest months of the year. And as you said, we just won a ban on police use of so-called crowd control weapons or chemical weapons. I mean, and then we won the Amazon tax, of course, quickly after that. They want to overturn these victories, no doubt, but above and beyond all of that, they absolutely fear the example that we are setting, because once you have an example of working class people getting organized in an independent movement, not depending on the establishment, not having faith in the establishment, and on our own strength, winning serious victories, that no victory by alone, no reform is going to end capitalism and bring about a socialist society. But what this fight for every reform does is it raises the confidence of working people that if we can win this, we can win more. That's the slippery slope, as you said, that big business is afraid of. And part of their strategy is to tire people and movements down by offensive upon offensive against us. And so I think we have to learn a lesson from this as well. And I would say the message it sends to us when we see such repeated attacks from big business, first of all, the message it has to send to us is to understand it does not look any different. As Frederick Douglass said so many years ago during the fight for slavery, fight to end slavery, power concedes nothing without a demand. It never has and it never will. So a big lesson we have to learn here is that the fight for progressive change of any kind, whether we're talking about women's rights, LGBTQ rights, the end to Black oppression, or the end to poverty, or dealing with the climate crisis, it doesn't matter what is politicizing and radicalizing you. One thing we have to understand is that there is no progressive change without a fight against the ruling class and the capitalist class, which has a stake in preserving the status quo. And we don't want the status quo. We want change. And so that represents a clash. It represents a political struggle that we have to undertake. So just understanding that it doesn't look any different, I think it elevates our understanding and immediately infuses confidence in the movement, because that means we've got to gear up and fight. And there's nothing wrong with that. We do that proudly. But there's more to it than that. When we are defending against attacks like this recall campaign against my office, we also have to understand that we are not going to play defense. The best defense is an offense. So that's why the solidarity campaign that we have launched, we're calling it the Kshama Solidarity campaign against the recall attempt. We are not just saying, oh, please save our seat. What we're saying is, look, this is what we have accomplished using this seat to build movements. If you think this is worth preserving, then we've got to fight for it. But you know what? We're not just fighting to preserve what we have won. We're fighting to win more victories. And that is why our campaign against the recall is also tied to a very inspiring offensive program of demands, including guaranteed jobs program under COVID, for a Green New Deal jobs program, by further taxing big business, for COVID relief for working people who have been affected by this pandemic, for canceling rent, mortgage, and utility payments for people who are unable to pay, and the real need for civilian oversight on the police, elected civilian oversight with full powers on the police.
And lastly, I mean, I don't think anyone watching would be naive enough to think Amazon isn't pulling some strings behind the scenes. We just saw this horrific report about their using the infamous Pinkerton spying agency on its workers in Europe, surveilling workers, surveilling environmentalists, surveilling, unionized movements in Europe. I think they're doing similar things here. What is your thoughts on Amazon after, again, they lost, and now there's a modest tax on them in Seattle, their role in trying to recall you?
I have no doubt that Amazon is going to be a big player. I mean, obviously, we don't make the mistake of thinking that Amazon is something unique, it's much worse than the run-of-the-mill workings of capitalism. Obviously, we know that's not true, but we also know that this is a product of capitalism itself, such a behemoth with $1 trillion global economic footprint. Obviously, that kind of disproportionate wealth comes with disproportionate political influence as well. So just like Amazon was a leader in its attempt to defeat us last year, which they did not succeed in, we have no doubt they're going to play an outsized role in the recall campaign as well. And, this is happening in the context of Amazon many corporations have profited during the pandemic in Seattle, and this is obviously going to be true for corporations in other cities as well. But look at especially Amazon's numbers. Amazon has made $11.5 billion with a B, $11.5 billion of profits just since April. I mean, April is when the pandemic, and the first lockdown and everything began. So since April, in that period when tens of millions of working people have taken a huge hit, enormous suffering economically because of the layoffs, because of income loss, not to mention the 250,000 deaths that have happened because of the criminal the criminal negligence by the Trump administration to deal with COVID. In that same period, these billionaires are amassing cash. So in other words, it is not hyperbole to call them pandemic profiteers. They are the pandemic profiteers. So Amazon's role and the role of these corporations in the recall effort against us is in the context of them making disproportionate profits in the face of the suffering of ordinary people. And that's why I think, in addition to the demands that our campaign will be fighting for starting January, we know we've already launched it here in Seattle. We also need to tie our fight against the recall in Seattle to the struggles of workers at Amazon themselves. I mean, we've seen some courageous speaking out by Amazon warehouse workers, delivery drivers throughout the nation, all the way from Seattle here to New York and Staten Island, where some of the workers have actually been fired for their actions to demand that there should be a safe workplace in the context of the pandemic. And just today, the Amazon workers in Alabama have filed for their union election at their warehouse in Bessemer, Alabama. This is extremely important, and we should make sure that workers who are fighting back so courageously against this massive corporation and the wealthiest people in the world, we need to be on their side. We need to be at the picket lines with them if they take actions, and we need to show to ordinary people that the fight against the recall in Seattle is tied to the fight of all the Amazon workers throughout the nation. And indeed, this is an international fight against capitalism.
And how could people support you in these efforts to avoid, if the Supreme Court of Washington State lets this continue, how could people support you?
I think it's very important that people actively support us. And in fact, the Supreme Court decision will come in January. I would say, please don't wait for that. If you are inspired by what we have just discussed here, please get in touch with us. Please go to kshamasolidarity.org. It's my first name and solidarity.org. You will get all the information there. Most immediately, we need donations from you all, because the recall campaign has already amassed $180,000 in donations from, as you just mentioned, right-wing and corporate donors. And in order to fight back against what we know is going to be a new onslaught of corporate spending, we have an urgent goal of raising another $20,000 by the end of this month. So if you are going to spend on Thanksgiving and Christmas, but you're not going to because this is a pandemic, this is such a worthy cause, because we are not about any individual or personality or any individual's career. Our office has been used 100% to fight for ordinary people, and we need to keep this office so that we can continue fighting and inspire further struggles.
Thank you, Councilmember Kshama Sawant. We will definitely stay in touch on this.
Thank you.
Hope you enjoyed that last video. Hop on over to statuscoup.com, where you can sign up for our email list and become a member for as low as $5 to $10 a month. Membership is how we grow. That's statuscoup.com/join. And remember, join our email list so we can grow the revolution with you.